The Latins were an ancient Italic people whose origins can be traced back to the second half of the second millennium BC, when they began to settle along the Tyrrhenian coastline of the Italian peninsula, particularly in the region of Latium. This region, characterized by its fertile plains, served as the cradle from which Latin culture and language would eventually spread. Politically fragmented, the various Latin tribes shared a common language, Latin, which is a member of the Latin Faliscan subgroup of the Italic languages, and they were unified by a converging cultural identity. The historical significance of the Latins is underscored by their essential contribution to the formation and evolution of the Roman identity. Rome, a city that emerged from these Latin roots, would expand throughout the Mediterranean basin and into significant parts of Europe during the first millennium BC, becoming a vehicle for Latin language and culture. The term Latin is often associated directly with Rome, and in the context of the Byzantine Empire, all Western Europeans were classified as Latins, reflecting a growing sense of commonality tied to Roman cultural supremacy. The etymology of the term Latins is thought to derive from latus, meaning wide, which aptly describes their habitation in the expansive plains compared to the surrounding hilly and mountainous terrains. This nomenclature emphasized their distinct cultural and geographical identity, distinguishing them from nearby peoples living in more rugged environments. Historically, the Latins are believed to have descended from a group referred to as the Aborigines, who Pliny the Elder and Livy described as one of the primitive inhabitants of Latium. According to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the Latins maintained their designation as Aborigines until the time of the Trojan War, when they began to be called Latins, allegedly after the legendary king Latinus, who ruled during this epoch. The blending of the Latins with the Trojans, specifically through the figure of Aeneas, who fled the burning city of Troy, signified a crucial moment in their history. Upon arriving in Italy and interacting with local tribes, including the Aborigines, Aeneas laid the foundation for a new ethnic identity that would come to be known as the Latins. Around the 12th century BC, the Latins began to migrate from the Apennine Mountains into the fertile plains of Latium after successfully expelling the Siculi, a neighboring tribe. This migration correlates with broader historical patterns involving Indo-European peoples evidenced in the linguistic and archaeological record from the late Bronze to the early Iron Age. As the Latins established their dominance over the territory, their interactions with other tribes such as the Pelasgi, a Greek tribe that had settled in the region, indicate early signs of inter-ethnic cooperation and conflict, particularly in the context of war. The Pelasgi allied with the Latins during their wars with Sicily, facilitating the expansion of Latin settlements. Central to the identity of the Latins was a pantheon of gods and sacred traditions linked to nature, war, and the community. These beliefs helped to forge a strong sense of identity and unity among the various tribes. Ritual practices were strongly embedded in their cults, where deities like Faunus, the protector of nature, and Jupiter, connected to the sky and state, reflected the militaristic and agricultural values of their society. The religious dimension was integrative. Religious beliefs worked to solidify political alliances between tribes, culminating in the formation of federations that could unite several Latin communities. The most notable was the Alban League, which emerged around the sanctuary of Jupiter on Mount Alban, setting a template for collective military action against external threats. By the late 6th century BC, Rome had emerged as a significant power within Latium, having absorbed many of its neighbors, including Tusculum and other Latin settlements. The dynamics of power shifted and political rivalries began to surface within Latium, leading to a series of confrontations between Rome and other Latin states as they vied for control and autonomy. The Battle of Regillus in 496 BC marked a pivotal moment where Rome, allied with the Latin cities, achieved victory against the powerful Etruscan allies of Athens and other threats. This victory allowed Rome to impose her will upon those cities, formalized through the Foedus Cassianum 493 BC, a treaty that structured relations between Rome and the Latin cities, ensuring mutual support and military cooperation. However, as Rome's power expanded, internal dissent among the Latins grew. The perception of Roman expansionism as a threat to local autonomy fueled tensions, and by the early 4th century BC, the landscape was rife with conflict. The Latins began to fear for their status and independence, leading them to form coalitions against Rome. These coalitions were not merely defensive, but were rooted in a collective military and religious tradition that resonated throughout all Latin communities. Throughout this period, both political alliance and rivalries were intertwined with religious rituals that framed the moral and ethical justifications for their wars. The resilience of Latin identity began to be tested by external pressures. In the 5th century BC, new invaders threatened. The Samnites, Volsci, and other Italic tribes launched attacks that prompted Rome to call upon her Latin allies for defense. Uniting against these invasions, cities like Praeneste and Tibur supported Rome against external foes, exposing shifting alliances that would shape future interactions. The Roman military began to innovate tactics and operations largely informed by earlier clashes and failures, such as the disastrous battle at the Allia River in 390 BC, which prompted a reevaluation of their military strategies and approaches to war. The systematic militaristic culture of the Latins, which coalesced through repeated engagements, underscored the importance of warfare in their societal and religious fabric. War was frequently sanctified through religious observance, establishing a sacred bond among the warriors that legitimized their actions in the eyes of the gods and the community. The sacrifice of lives and property for the common good became a ritualistic endeavor steeped in the traditions that linked their warfare to the divine. After the Gallic invasion and the subsequent sack of Rome, which resulted in significant disruption, Rome fortified her military institutions and societal bonds, enhancing her capacity to counter both internal dissent and external threats. The defeat of the Gauls catalyzed a period of military reforms that led to a stronger, more cohesive Roman army. In the mid to late 4th century BC, the conflict reached a fever pitch as Rome expanded into the territory of the Latins, asserting dominance over former allies. Events such as the capture of Veii in 396 BC exemplified the shifts in power dynamics as the city fell after a prolonged siege. This marked a turning point in Roman-Latin relations, where many other Latin city-states began to perceive Roman expansion as an imminent threat, leading them to reconsider their relationships with each other and with Rome. As Rome consolidated power, her relationship with the Latins transitioned from one of alliance to dominance. By 338 BC, after a series of military confrontations, Rome effectively absorbed many of the Latin cities, establishing a new political order within Italy. The culmination of political rivalries and religious affinities marked the end of the Latin identities as autonomous political ones, merging them into the broader Roman identity. This transition was not merely political but also cultural, with Roman culture increasingly defined by its Latinate roots. The Sabines were an ancient Italic people who lived in central Italy, particularly in the mountainous regions of the Apennines, corresponding to parts of today's province of Rieti and the upper Aterno region in the province of L'Aquila. Their origins can be traced back to migrations from the Oscan Umbrian cultural groups, tying them ethnically to the Samnites and Sabellians, as evident from their shared ethnonym Sabines, noted in ancient Hellenic texts. This connection is reaffirmed by shared traditions and myths where they are depicted participating in the sacred rite of ver sacrum, a practice of dedicating all offspring born in a particular year to the war deity Mars, compelling them to seek new territories as adults. Historically, the Sabines are noted for their military traditions, closely tied to their religious practices. Plutarch and Dionysius of Halicarnassus remark on the lack of defensive walls in Sabine cities, indicating their Spartan-like origins. They initially engaged in warfare with the Aborigines, potentially an older Neolithic group, seizing their capital, Lista, during an aggressive foray from Amiternum. This incident illustrates not only the Sabines' martial prowess, but also their strategic aggression in consolidating territory. The Sabines regularly clashed with their neighbors, particularly the Umbrians, and historical accounts suggest that during wartime they decided all newborns to Ares, that is Mars, as a form of ritual tribute reflecting their militaristic spirituality. Strabo narrates how the Sabines undertook journeys led by auspicious signs, utilizing the sacrifice of animals as a divine impetus for conquest and settlement, reinforcing their interlinkage between their military ambitions and religious rites. Throughout the 5th century BC, the Sabines expanded their influence in Lazio, often capitalizing on moments of Roman vulnerability. Notably, they allied with other Italic groups, challenging the growing power of Rome. In 503 BC, a Roman consular victory against the Sabines, as recorded in the Fasti Triumphales, demonstrated their ongoing rivalry, which continued through the decades. The Sabines attempted incursions into Roman territory, reaching as far as the gates of Rome herself, suggesting a persistent and aggressive policy aimed at regional dominance. The Sabines were incorporated into the Roman state through a gradual process. Following the foundation of Rome, the legendary event of the rape of the Sabines highlighted the complex intertwining of Roman and Sabine identities. According to tradition, this incident, which likely took place at Crustumerium near the Tiber, led to the eventual union of these two groups, honored by the establishment of a joint rule under Romulus and Titus Statius, the latter being a pivotal figure in Sabine history. The integration of the Sabines into Rome brought significant military enhancements to the Roman army, increasing its numbers and capabilities through the inclusion of Sabine warriors. Romulus's adoption of Sabine shields and military attire signifies the profound influence of Sabine traditions within the formative years of Rome. However, despite intermarriage and political alliances, tensions persisted. The military expeditions led by Roman kings such as Tarquinius Priscus were characterized by fierce confrontations with Sabine forces, reflecting an ongoing struggle for power in the region. Under Servius Tullius, further wars ensued, underlying the persistent opposition to Roman expansionism. The political landscape transitioning into the Republic saw crucial moments such as the migration of Attius Clausus from Sabina to Rome in 504, who, accompanied by thousands of clients, effectively shifted the balance of influence and initiated the formation of the ancient Claudian tribe. His integration into the Roman elite demonstrates the gradual integration of Sabines into Roman political life and institutions. Notably, this assimilation was not without conflict. Victories such as that of Marcus Horatius Barbatus in 449 BC against the Sabines marked significant turning points. By the late 3rd century, constant military pressure and the systematic Roman expansion policies led to the effective subjugation of the Sabine territory. Under the command of Marius Curius Dentatus, the Roman army penetrated deep into Sabine lands, confiscating vast tracts of land and distributing them to Roman settlers. The consequent Romanization of the Sabines occurred rapidly, and by 268 BC they were formally granted Roman citizenship, albeit with limited civil rights. Culturally, the Sabines significantly influenced the early Roman religion and tradition. Central to their worship was the goddess Vacuna, associated with nature and military victory, reflecting how intertwined their militaristic and religious life was. Many of their religious practices were adopted and integrated into Roman religious life, most notably the rites associated with Titus Statius and the cult of Quirinus, further indicating the blending of their cultural identities. The Sabine linguistic heritage, classified as a dialect of the Oscan language, began to fade with the increasing dominance of Latin, leading to a gradual erosion of distinct Sabine culture. Despite this, they retained elements of their religious practices, such as the annual celebrations that honored various agricultural deities and military rites. With the rise of Rome as a dominant power throughout Italy, the significance of the Sabines evolved. They found themselves part of a larger entity that valorized their traditions while integrating them into a new militaristic and political framework that characterized the Roman state. By the late Republican period, the Sabines had not only contributed to the military might and cultural fabric of Rome, but had also experienced a transformation that saw their identity absorbed into the greater narrative of Roman history. The Samnites were an ancient Italic people who inhabited the central and southern parts of the Italian peninsula, covering what is now segments of Abruzzo, Molise, Campania, and extending into areas of Lazio, Apulia, and Basilicata. Their historical context is crucial in understanding the socio-political landscape of pre-Roman Italy and the fundamental shifts that occurred with Rome's expansion. Defined by a strongly federative system, these Samnites organized themselves in a confederation of tribes known as the Samnitic League, which was characterized by its militaristic traditions and societal structure. This league comprised four main tribes: the Pentri, Hirpini, Caudini, and Marrucini. Their political framework did not centralize around a single city-state, but was rather organized through a series of local communities known as tuto, a term that signified a form of tribal confederation. Each tuto consisted of several pagi, semi-autonomous districts, indicating a complex system of governance that relied heavily on local identities while promoting a collective confederate strength against external threats. Historically, the Samnites are portrayed as a society immersed in pastoralism and agriculture, yet highly militaristic, with warfare forming an inherent part of their socio-political fabric. This reputation for bellicosity was established early in their interactions with Rome. Roman historiography narrates their initial contact, which began in 354 BC with a treaty of friendship. However, by 343, territorial ambitions led the Sabines to take Capua, a city pivotal for the Etruscans, thus inviting Roman military intervention. The series of engagements that followed, collectively known as the Samnite Wars, highlighted a fierce and strategic resistance from the Samnites. The first war concluded with a relatively swift Roman victory at the Battle of Suessula in 341 BC, yet it ended with a treaty that allowed for some Samnite autonomy. This peace, however, proved temporary, culminating in the Second Samnite War, 326-304 BC. This war erupted largely over territorial disputes, particularly following the Roman colonization of Fregellae within Samnite boundaries. The second war saw considerable initial success for the Samnites, whose military tactics adeptly utilized the rugged terrain for ambushes and skirmishes. Under Gaius Pontius' command, the Samnites executed a decisive victory at the infamous Battle of the Caudine Forks, 321 BC, where the Roman legions were trapped, leading to a humiliating surrender that imposed strict peace terms favoring the Samnites. However, despite these early wins, the tide eventually turned. Internal discord among the Samnites, stemming from their federative system and relations with recently subjugated Italic tribes, coupled with the Romans' unyielding military adaptations, began to erode their gains. By the Third Samnite War, 298-290 BC, the Samnites, fearing the escalating power of Rome, formed an alliance with Etruscans and Umbrians, yet this coalition was ultimately ineffective against the Roman military machine, which had undergone significant professionalization. The Roman victory at the Battle of Sentinum in 295 BC marked a crucial turning point, effectively isolating the Samnites. The decisive Battle of Aquilonia in 293 BC resulted in a catastrophic defeat for the Samnites, leading to their subjugation and the annexation of their territories into the Roman state system. Subsequent to the defeat, Rome instituted policies aimed at consolidating her control over the Samnites. The formation of the Beneventum colony in 268 BC effectively severed the major tribes of the Samnites, particularly the Pentri and Hirpini, further fracturing their internal alliances and communal identities. While nominally retaining some rights, the Samnites faced enforced assimilation into the Roman administrative framework, marked by land confiscations and the integration of local elites into the Roman aristocracy. Over time, this facilitated the gradual erosion of their distinct cultural and political identities, driven by systematic deportations, suppression of traditional leadership systems, and the imposition of Roman law. The Samnites demonstrated persistence in their identity and resistance to Roman rule. They partook in the social war 90 to 88 BC, during which they established a temporary capital at Corfinium, reflecting their ambition to assert autonomy amidst the ongoing Roman hegemony. The leaders of this revolt, such as Quinctus Popedius Silo and Gaius Papius Mutilus, orchestrated organized military force that showcased their enduring martial traditions. However, this rebellion ultimately failed, leading to severe repercussions from Rome, including destruction of territories and a systematic crackdown on dissent. Despite the gradually enforced Romanization, the Samnites retained cultural practices deeply tied to their military traditions. Their armies were known for their warrior ethos and complex military organization. They maintained a system of local leaders, including the Medix Tuticus, who held command akin to Roman consuls but did not share executive power. The militaristic nature of Samnite society remained evident, with army training integral to community identity and function. The Vereia, an institution for young men to prepare for military service, illustrates this. It reflected their commitment to martial discipline and the ethos of collective defense, paralleling the Roman military's formative institutions. The Samnites also exhibited a rich religious life that intertwined with their political and military culture. Religion was integral to daily existence, signifying a deeply held belief in divine favor influencing the outcomes of their struggles. The Samnites practiced a form of polyatry, worshipping many deities simultaneously, often venerating them at shared altars. Their pantheon included deities like Mars, Mamertei, exuding dual characteristics of agriculture and warfare, emphasizing the intertwined nature of their agrarian and militaristic identity. Significant rituals were held to ensure favor from divine entities critical for the survival and success in battle. Cultic practices often involved invoking blessings for military engagements, thus illustrating the sacred tradition. Thither to their warfare, the Samnitic religious landscape was rich in symbolism, linking agricultural fertility to martial prowess, with ceremonies dedicated to securing divine protection during conflicts. The sacred rites typically included screenings of ritualistic sacrifices and communal gatherings, reaffirming their identity in adversity. By the late 2nd century BC, the encroachment of Roman religion began to overshadow the Samnite belief system, leading to the inevitable decline of their ancient traditions. The Richmond tablet, or tabula osca, serves as a crucial document evidencing the religious practices, mentioning various deities associated with agriculture and martial success, elucidating their fundamental reliance on the divine for both warfare and sustenance. The defeat at the Battle of Porta Collina in 82 BC represented a culmination of pressures leading to the suppression of Samnite identity and the eventual integration into Roman culture and citizenship. The Umbrians were an ancient Italic people belonging to the Oscan-Umbrian group of Indo-European languages. They inhabited a region that, during classical antiquity, stretched from the upper and middle valleys of the Tiber River to the Adriatic Sea. Their primary economic activities included agriculture and animal husbandry, but their society was also marked by a significant level of craftsmanship. They successfully produced and traded metalwork, notably weapons, bronze and iron ornaments, and pottery, fostering economic exchanges with neighboring peoples. Linguistically, the Umbrians communicated in a distinct language characterized by a script which evolved from Etruscan writing before being entirely supplanted by Latin. Their burial customs included inhumation, contributing to the understanding of their cultural practices. The term Umbri itself is derived from the Latin and Hellenic sources, indicating that their self-designation is not well documented. However, the term reflects their ancient presence in Italy, with historical narratives asserting that they were among the earliest inhabitants of the region. The origins of the Umbrian people can be traced back to the late Bronze Age, during which the area was influenced by the broader Proto-Villanovian culture, indicative of significant social developments across central Italy. By the Iron Age, the Umbrians began to organize into densely populated regions characterized by fortified settlements and evolving urbanization, representing a marked transition from a primarily tribal and nomadic lifestyle to more complex urban centers governed through a system of city-states. They established noteworthy settlements such as Ameria, Assisium, and Spoletium, which played pivotal roles in regional governance, military organization, and economic activities. Their political system was interwoven with military readiness, adhering to sacred traditions that emphasized the divine sanctioning of warfare, the Umbrians forged alliances and engaged in military action, particularly against encroaching civilizations such as the Etruscans and Gauls. Pliny the Elder documented how the Etruscans had once subdued 300 Umbrian cities, highlighting the military struggles that had shaped their early existence. Contact with Romans began towards the end of the 4th century BC, a period marked by expanding Roman territorial ambitions. The Umbrians engaged with the Romans during a phase of military conquests, though their approach was largely conciliatory. The Umbrians initially maintained a neutral stance during significant wars, such as the Battle of Sentinum in 295 BC, where a confederation of Gallo-Etruscan Italian forces was defeated by an expanding Roman army. In gratitude for their neutrality and apparent cooperation, the Romans allowed the Umbrians to retain their customs, including their religious practices. The Umbrian religious system, as revealed through the Aequi tablets, underscores the intertwined nature of their faith and political power. The tablets, ancient inscriptions dating from the 5th to the 1st century BC, illustrate how the Umbrian priests, known as the fratres Aetii, held esteemed positions within their religious hierarchy. This priestly class was dedicated to Jupiter, the Umbrian form of the sky god synonymous with warfare and authority, reinforcing the militaristic essence of Umbrian spirituality. Alongside Jupiter, they worshipped other deities including Mart, analogous to the Roman Mars, thus establishing a divine sanction for their martial endeavors. The significance of religious practices extended beyond personal piety. Temples and sanctuaries served as important hubs for community life, fostering civic engagement and collective identity. These sites functioned as political gathering places where military decisions were intertwined with sacred ceremonies, reinforcing the warriors' commitment to both their gods and their communal obligations. Such traditions mirrored broader Indo-European practices where the outpouring of divine favor legitimized military ventures and societal cohesion. When Hannibal marched through central Italy during the Second Punic War, the Umbrians reaffirmed their loyalty to Rome, showcasing their political acumen and military strategy. Although they faced increasing pressure from neighboring tribes, their cultural integrity withstood Roman encroachment to some extent. This cultural resilience was evidenced by the use of the Umbrian language and traditions that persisted in local practices documented in various inscriptions and historical accounts until the 1st century AD. As the Roman influence expanded, the process of Romanization intensified. The Umbrians gradually adopted Roman customs yet maintained significant aspects of their identity. By the late Republic, the integration of Umbrian towns into the Roman political and military systems altered their former identities, leading to a transformation of their societal organization. The establishment of Roman colonies in Umbrian territories altered the socio-political landscape, further interlinking the military and civic realms. The Falisci were a prominent ancient people from southern Etruria, primarily associated with their urban center Faleri, located in what is now Civita Castellana, Italy. The etymology of the term Falisci likely has Latin roots and is connected to the toponym of their principal city. And the ancient writers suggested that the name could derive from Aleso, the mythical founder of Faleri. Evidence of the Falisci dates back to at least to the 7th century BC, with inscriptions unearthed in Etruscan contexts that hint at their identity and societal organization. The Falisci's historical narrative is firmly intertwined with that of the Etruscans. From the 5th century BC, they allied themselves with Etruscan cities and neighboring tribes in their mutual opposition to the burgeoning power of Rome. Noted by historians such as Strabo and Livy, the Falisci were significantly involved in the regional politics of Etruria, often participating in federal councils at the sacred site of Volturnae, which served as a central religious and political assembly for the Etruscan Confederation. This inclusion in wider Etruscan networks reflects their military and political orientation as the Falisci sought to defend their territories against Roman encroachment. Archaeological insights suggest that the origins of the Falisci may be traced to linguistic and cultural affiliations with the Indo-European peoples. They are often placed in relation to the Latins, due to the shared linguistic features and customs, indicating they arrived in the Italian peninsula around the late Bronze Age. Linguistic analyses have positioned the Faliscan language as closely related to Latin, reinforcing the notion that they were a branch of the Latin-speaking peoples that migrated southward from Central Europe. Their presence in the Italian territories marked their integration into a broader Indo-European cultural milieu, where they cohabited with various tribes such as the Oscans and Umbrians. The Falisci bore witness to significant transformations in their societal dynamics, particularly during the 5th century BC, when they engaged militarily against Roman forces. In 437, they entered into combat with the Romans while allied with the Veientes and Fidenae, resulting in widespread losses. This marked a turning point as the Romans, under the command of General Lucius Sergius Fidenas, managed to secure a significant victory despite suffering substantial casualties themselves. The battle's ferocity prompted the Roman Senate to appoint a dictator, Mamercus Aemilius Mamercinus, to continue the military effort against the combined Etruscan forces, highlighting the continuing threat posed by the Falisci and their allies. The Falisci's military engagements against Rome were not isolated incidents. They were part of a broader context of Etruscan resistance to Roman expansion. In 396 BC, the lengthy war in which the Falisci participated culminated in a decisive Roman victory over the Veientes, which led to the occupation of several Etruscan territories, including those of the Falisci. Key events from this period include the unique circumstances surrounding the surrender of Falaise. According to legend, when the Faliscan schoolmaster led his students out of the city as hostages, he entrusted them to the Roman general Camillus. To the surprise of many, Camillus rejected the offer, which prompted the Falisci to capitulate to Roman forces due to the display of moral rectitude and respect for the sanctity of childhood, further deepening the narrative of the Romans as a civilization rooted in stern moral codes, juxtaposed with military prowess. The political landscape shifted dramatically in the following decades. Despite initial attempts at maintaining their autonomy, including a rebellion in 358 BC amid broader conflicts involving Tarquinia, the Falisci ultimately faced the overwhelming military force of Rome. In 351 BC, they once again submitted to Roman authority, formalizing a treaty that permitted the presence of a Roman garrison in Falaise. However, even this fragile peace was short-lived. Following the First Punic War, perceiving the Falisci as a lingering threat, Rome retaliated fiercely. During their subsequent campaigns, Roman forces inflicted devastating defeats on the Falisci, reportedly causing the deaths of approximately 15,000 warriors, leading to the complete destruction of Falaise and its eventual reconstruction as Falaise Novi. This strategic relocation not only marginalized the Falisci but also forced their remaining populace into subjugation, irrevocably altering their status from an independent people to one subdued and integrated into Roman societal and political systems. Religiously, the Falisci maintained traditions that paralleled Etruscan and Roman military customs. Their pantheon included deities such as Soranus, a significant figure in their religious practices whose worship centered around Mount Soracte. Rituals honoring Soranus bore similarities to Roman celebratory events such as the Lupercalia, indicating a blend of indigenous Italian traditions with those adopted from neighboring cultures. Observances like the Decimatus, a celebration occurring on the 10th day after the Ides, showed the intermingling of Faliscan festivities with Roman religious practices, particularly those dedicated to Minerva. This reflects the Falisci's adaptation, highlighting their integration within a wider Hellenistic and Italic religious framework, while still embodying distinct cultural elements that defined their identity. As the Falisci transitioned from a tribal group into a subdued population within the Roman system, the political significance of their territory, known as Ager Faliscus, diminished considerably. Once actively resisting Roman dominion, their cities, including Falaise Veteris, faced Roman administrative restructuring. By the late 3rd century BC, after the fall of Falaise Veteris, the identity of the Falisci as a separate entity dissipated, culminating in their eventual inclusion among Italic allies supporting Romans in battles like the one at Cannae in 216 BC. The Marsians, an Italic people, historically occupied the mountainous regions surrounding Lake Fucino in what is now the Abruzzo area of Italy. Language-wise, they spoke an Oscan Umbrian dialect, the earliest inscriptions of which date back to the Bronze of Rapino and the Bronze of Antino. Their etymological roots linked them to the god Mamertei, a significant deity in their belief system with direct ties to the Roman god of war Mars. This connection underscores their martial inclination and reflects a broader Indo-European religious framework where the concepts of warfare and divine favor were deeply intertwined. The Marsians emerged as a distinct group in the second half of the second millennium BC, potentially around the 12th century, migrating into the Italian peninsula as part of the Oscan Umbrian peoples. Their central settlement, Marruvium, located in modern-day San Benedetto dei Marsi, became a significant cultural and political center. Additional notable sites included Antinum, Carfennia, and Lucus Angitiae, the latter housing a sacred grove dedicated to the goddess Angitias, further emphasizing the religious dimensions of Marsian life. The religious practices of the Marsians were not only diverse but also reflected their military ethos, particularly in rituals meant to secure divine support for their armies. Their relations with Rome initiated in the late 4th century BC, when they faced the necessity of aligning with the powerful Roman Republic rather than continuing armed opposition. Initially, they were part of a broader alliance of Italic tribes during the Second Samnite War, collaborating with the Vestini, Marrucini, and Paeligni against Roman expansion. During this period, Marsian forces, alongside their allies, engaged in several military engagements as they sought to defend their territories from encroaching Roman dominance. Despite initial military encounters that led to substantial Marsian casualties, the necessity of aligning with Rome became evident as their strength paled against the might of Roman legions. By around 304 BC, following significant Roman victories over the Aequi, the Marsians reached out to Rome, formally seeking an alliance. This led to the granting of the status of Socii Italici, allowing for some measure of self-governance while still recognizing Roman authority. This arrangement fostered a degree of autonomy in local affairs and helped mitigate further militaristic aspirations against Roman control. Throughout the 3rd century BC, the martial alliances and collaborations continued, with the Marsians participating alongside Roman forces in the Second Punic War. They contributed significantly, equipping a cavalry contingent of approximately 4,000 soldiers that operated under Roman commanders. Their loyalty during this critical conflict reflected their strategic choice to maintain alliance over outright resistance, a choice that would foster closer ties with Rome. Nonetheless, during Hannibal's invasion, Marsian territories suffered, although claims regarding his destruction of Marsian lands may not accurately represent the geographical realities of his campaign. The struggle for identity and recognition would reach a boiling point with the onset of the Social War, 91-88 BC, a significant war fueled by widespread dissatisfaction among the Italic tribes regarding their lengthy exclusion from Roman citizenship. The Marsians, actively leading this insurrection, joined forces with other tribes, including the Paeligni and Piceni, striving for autonomy and recognition. They played crucial roles in organizing military strategies, with leaders such as Quintus Popedius Silo and Titus Lafrenius directing their combined efforts. The war not only showcased their martial abilities, but also revealed the political fractures and challenges facing Rome as it coped with a growing internal insurrection. Military engagements throughout this period were marked by intensity and brutality, with the Marsians adopting aggressive tactics in hopes of overwhelming Roman forces. In notable encounters, the Marsians initially gained momentum, securing key victories against Roman detachments. However, the internal divisions among the Italic rebels inevitably led to fragmentation and setbacks. The Roman response, marked by overwhelming military might and strategic counterattacks, gradually shifted the tide in favor of the Republic. As the war concluded, Rome ultimately emerged victorious, implementing policies aimed at integrating the rebellious factions. The Lex Julia de Civitate expanded citizenship to all who remained loyal to Rome, effectively integrating Marsians and other insurgent groups into the Roman political framework and solidifying their allegiance. This incorporation led to intensified Romanization processes characterized by demographic shifts and cultural assimilation, as the once distinct Marsian identity began to dissipate into the broader Roman populace. The rapid adoption of Latin over the Oscan Umbrian dialects marked a significant cultural transformation, indicative of the profound influence of Roman governance on the native traditions. Religion remained a vital aspect of Marsian identity throughout these transitions. Their pantheon included figures such as Agnithiae, the goddess associated with healing and magic, and Feronia, linked to fertility. The Marsians' reputation as skilled practitioners of magic and healing infused their military traditions with a belief in divine support during warfare. This militarily sacred approach fostered a unique blend of faith and combat, whereby rituals were performed to invoke favorable outcomes in battle. Governance among the Marsians was led by a Meddex who wielded significant authority both politically and militarily, acts akin to the Roman praetores. This role emphasized the Marsians' commitment to their own leadership systems, even while under Roman influence, maintaining a semblance of traditional authority amid changing political realities. They continued to engage with the sacred, viewing their military ventures as both earthly pursuits and divine missions. Despite the eventual fading of distinct Marsian identity, their legacy persisted through military service in Roman legions. The saying that it took 4 Roman soldiers to equal a singular Marsian warrior speaks of the fierce martial reputation they maintained. The transition to full Roman citizenship brought many opportunities, but also led to the dilution of native customs and practices in favor of Roman norms and governance. The Volscians were an ancient Italic people of Indo-European origins linked to the Oscan Umbrian linguistic group. Their initial settlement was in the central Apennines, and they were believed to have occupied territories between present-day Umbria and Sabine. By the 5th century BC, they migrated southwards to the historical regions of Lazio, particularly around the Lepinian and Ausonian mountains, which were geologically advantageous due to abundant iron and copper resources. The etymology of the name Volsci potentially stems from the root Vols, which is evident in the names of Etruscan cities such as Volsini Veteres and Volsini Nov. This name could be a combination of the ethnonym Osk paired with the prefix Vol, indicating possibly ancient or warlike Osks. Such nomenclature reflects their martial traditions and indicates a society deeply entrenched in warfare and territorial expansion. The Volsci were part of a wider wave of Indo-European migration that spread across Europe during the latter half of the Bronze Age and into Italy. Their arrival marked a significant phase in the cultural landscape of pre-Roman Italy. An early influx of these peoples around 1200 BC, referred to as the Italic incinerators, engaged in cremation practices and laid the groundwork for later Italic groups. Around 1000 BC, a second migration wave occurred. This group consisted of Oscan Umbrian traditions, notably the Volscian Sabines, who practiced inhumation. Over time, these groups settled in various regions, fragmenting into distinct cultural and territorial identities. Among them, the Volsci became notable for their unique response to the geographical and social conditions they encountered, especially as they began to encroach upon the territories of more established cultures, such as the Etruscans and the Greeks who occupied central and southern Italy, respectively. The Volsci effectively expanded their territory through the valleys of Liri and Sacco, reaching the Tyrrhenian Sea. They formed settlements, most notably the Ecetranian Volsci, who established their capital in Echetra, a city that later vanished from historical records, and the Anseates Volsci, who colonized the coastal area with their capital at Antium. Their migration was often spurred by seasonal rites, particularly the Ver Sacrum, which required a portion of the population to leave their homeland to found new settlements. This cyclical obligation reflects a belief system where martial prowess and the sacred were intertwined, providing a religious justification for their territorial expansions. By the 7th century BC, the cultural landscape in Italy was significantly influenced by two highly advanced civilizations, the Etruscans in central Italy and the Greeks in the south. The Volsci, benefiting from fertile lands around the valleys of Sacco and Liri, established a strong agricultural and pastoral economy. They were well positioned geographically, taking control over vital connection routes that facilitated trade and movement across regions. After successfully overcoming the intervening mountains, the Volsci advanced into what is now known as the Roman countryside in the late 6th century BC, taking advantage of the political instability of early Rome. At this time, Rome was transitioning from a monarchy to a republic, which left it vulnerable to external threats. The Volsci seized this opportunity, particularly targeting Antium, and settled into the area known as the Campagna Romana. This land was divided into two distinct territories: low-lying, malaria-prone marshlands along the Tyrrhenian coast, the Pontine fields, and more hilly, healthier but less fertile interior regions. The Volsci were formidable adversaries of early Rome, frequently aligning with other tribes such as the Aequi against the emerging power of Rome, which they viewed as a rival rather than a potential ally. Historical sources, especially those from Livy, describe the Volsci as being, quote, more eager to rebel than to engage in open battle, underscoring their propensity for political rivalry and guerrilla tactics. One of their most critical periods came during the early 5th century BC, when Suessa Pometia, a significant Volscian city and likely their capital, was destroyed by the Romans in 495. Following this defeat, Antium, initially a Latin settlement, assumed prominence as the new capital of the Volsci-controlled territory. The military engagements between the Romans and the Volsci were characterized by a series of confrontations that were not only territorial struggles, but also reflections of deep-seated tensions rooted in differing political systems and religious beliefs. The Volscian economy, heavily reliant on agriculture and pastoralism, thrived on the seasonal migration of sheep, an economic system that was vital for their survival and military provisioning. The Volscians played a crucial role in the transhumance routes that connected the interior of Italy to the coastal regions, which ultimately benefited the Romans when they assimilated these lands. The Romans, recognizing the Volsci as a significant military threat, built infrastructure to consolidate their control over these territories. Roads like the Via Latina were constructed following ancient paths that provided military and economic advantages, facilitating troop movements and trade throughout the region. The Volscian cities, including Antium and Velitrae, served as pivotal locations for the Romans, who would later use these as launching points for further military expeditions. As Roman power expanded, the Volsci gradually lost their independence, experiencing a systematic erosion of their identity and autonomy despite their initial resistance. The political systems of the Romans overshadowed Volsci's traditional systems, integrating their practices into a more extensive Roman framework. Ideologically, the Volsci maintained a rich tradition of religious rites, honoring various deities reflective of the broader Indo-European pantheon, illustrating that their belief systems were both deeply rooted and militarily significant, serving as a unifying force amidst the turmoil of war. The linguistic contributions of the Volsci remain a subject of academic interest, with the Volscian language identified within the Sabellic group. Their primary historical artifact, the Tabula Veliterna, is indicative of their cultural practices, detailing offerings to a goddess named Decluna, which highlights their religious observance. The discovery of an incised axe from the necropolis of Satricum further adds to the knowledge about Volscian language and culture from the earlier part of the 5th century BC. Prominent figures from Volscian heritage, such as the character Camilla, a warrior maiden in Virgil's Aeneid, reflect their historical and cultural significance in Roman literature. These representations serve as testament to the complex interplay between the Volsci and the burgeoning Roman state, which ultimately absorbed their territories and culture. The Aequi were an ancient Italic people who inhabited a region that lies in today's Lazio and Abruzzo, Italy. They are often noted in historical texts, especially in the works of Livy, for their consistent opposition to Rome during the early centuries of the city's existence. This opposition was not merely political, but was also rooted in the militaristic traditions inherent to their society, which revered strength and warrior prowess as vital components of their identity. The Aequi occupied the upper valleys of the Anio, Tolenus, Himella, and Saltus River, all of which flow northward and converge into the Nera River. Their territory was primarily hilly, despite the etymology of their name possibly linking them to the Latin term aequum, which means plain. This suggests that while they identified with the concept of flatlands, their actual habitat included more rugged and elevated areas, indicative of a diverse landscape that nurtured both pastoral and military endeavors. The military presence of the Aequi was significant in their early interactions with Rome. Historically, many of their fortified settlements, or oppida, fell to Roman arms during the era of Tarquinius Priscus in the late 7th to early 6th century BC. These early encounters laid the groundwork for a prolonged and tumultuous relationship. The Aequi's resistance reached a notable point around 484 BC, when their main settlement was first captured by Roman forces, but their autonomy was temporarily restored as Rome faced her own internal challenges. The Aequi did not capitulate easily, demonstrating their entrenched resolve through various military actions against Rome. Their final subjugation came only after the Second Samnite War, which placed them in a precarious position as Roman expansionism grew. Despite their eventual defeat, the Aequi were offered limited autonomy, allowing them to maintain some semblance of governance within a Roman-administered system. By the end of the Social War, the inhabitants of the Aequi area were reorganized into the Res Publica Aequiculanorum, with its center located in Nersae, close to modern-day Pescorocchiano. This municipality was representative of the Roman system of administration, which integrated conquered peoples while simultaneously exerting control over their local traditions and governance. Among other cities associated with the Aequi was Tora, situated near modern Sant'Anatolia. The archaeological evidence, such as polygonal walls found in several locations, contributes significantly to our understanding of their military architecture and social organization. The Aequi spoke a language that remains largely undocumented, but neighboring populations like the Marsi to the east and the Hernici to the southwest were of Oscan Umbrian ethnicity, suggesting linguistic and cultural affinities. The name Aequi itself likely has its roots in an ancient Indo-European language, further indicating their connections to broader cultural and religious practices typical of the region. In 303 BC, Roman consuls Lucius Genutius Aventinensis and Servius Cornelius Lentulus established the colony of Albafucans within Aequi territory, settling it with 6,000 Latin colonists. This act marked a critical moment in the Aequi's militaristic history, as the establishment of a fortified Latin colony represented both a provocation and a challenge to their regional authority. In 302 BC, unable to tolerate the presence of Roman soldiers and settlers in their lands, the Aequi attempted to capture the fortified settlement. However, the defenders of Albafucans held their ground without requiring reinforcements from Rome, illustrating the resilience of Roman military organization. Titus Livius noted the surprising nature of Aequi resistance, suggesting that their ability to challenge the well-trained Roman army was unexpected given the Aequi's diminished status at the time. Such skirmishes were part of a broader pattern of Aequi military engagement that focused on defending their territory and identity against Roman expansion. As the Republic progressed, the Aequi found themselves increasingly absorbed into the Roman political and military framework. By the late Republican period, they were primarily organized into two municipia located in the upper valley of the Salto and referred to in historical texts as Cicolanus. The extensive arrangement of polygonal walls signifying military fortifications across numerous sites in the region serves as a testament to their militaristic traditions and societal values centered on warfare. The Vestini were an Italic people belonging to the Oscan-Umbrian language family, inhabiting a region that ranged from the highland of the rocks to the Aternum Valley to the Adriatic Sea, particularly in areas corresponding to modern Penne, Città Sant'Angelo, and Pescara, the latter of which they controlled the port. Their history is closely intertwined with that of Rome, beginning with military engagements and evolving into a gradually defined but complex relationship characterized by both rivalry and eventual integration. The roots of the Vestini can be traced back to the second half of the second millennium BC, when Oscan-Umbrian groups penetrated the Italian peninsula, establishing settlements in the Aternum Valley between the 11th and the 8th centuries BC. The exact moment they coalesced into a recognizable ethnic group is not clearly defined, as archaeological evidence suggests a greater system of cultural interchanges among various Italic peoples, rather than straightforward migration patterns. As they emerged from obscurity, the Vestini occupied a strategically significant territory, extending their influence from the heights of the Gran Sasso down to the Adriatic coast. Politically, the Vestini initially aligned themselves with other Italic tribes, including the Marsi, Marrucini, and Paeligni, forming a confederation in opposition to Roman expansion during the Second Samnite War. Their military alliance with the Samnites prompted Roman military leaders concerned about the rising threat of a united Italic front to consider punitive actions. The Roman general Decimus Junius Brutus Scaeva led to campaigns against the Vestini, where Roman forces inflicted significant losses, demonstrating Rome's military superiority. Although the Vestini were recognized for their warrior ethos, their actual military capabilities were often overstated. The Roman successes against them, including the siege and capture of their fortified towns such as Cutina and Gingilia, underscored the effectiveness of their military strategies, yet revealed vulnerabilities in the Vestini's system of defenses. The defeat of the Vestini and their inclination to integrate into Roman alliances was a gradual process. Despite the heavy Roman incursions, the Vestini did not achieve a formal treaty with Rome until 302 BC. This delay indicated their complex relationship with the Romans, as they were often viewed with suspicion and hostility compared to their Italic counterparts, who appeared more willing to collaborate. Following this treaty, Vestini cities such as Aveia and Pertuinum were directly absorbed into the Roman Republic, leading to an incremental Romanization of their population and their military. The trajectory of the Vestini shifted significantly following their participation in the Social War 91-88, which was sparked by the acute tensions between Rome and the Italics over the denial of citizenship rights. This war saw the Vestini join a broader coalition seeking political and civil recognition. They played a crucial role within Italic contingents, with leadership coming from figures like Gaius Pontilius. Their military involvement highlighted the deeply entrenched martial traditions within the Vestini society, as warfare was often intertwined with their religious practices, solidifying their identity and resolve against Rome's dominance. Despite the initial successes against Roman legions, the coalition ultimately succumbed to superior Roman military strategy and resource allocation. The Vestini faced defeats at pivotal battles, including those led by General Cneius Pompeius Strabo, which forced them to adapt to the increasingly hostile landscape of Roman expansion. Following the Social War, the Lex Julia de Civitate was enacted, granting citizenship to all Italics who showed loyalty to Rome, which over time included many among the Vestini who had once resisted Roman authority. This measure catalyzed the Romanization process, which penetrated deep into all facets of Vestini life, showing that armed resistance did not ultimately prevent integration into the Roman administrative and military systems. With the integration of citizenship came profound changes to their social and economic systems. Vestini communities transitioned from their traditional structures, characterized by rigid hierarchies of local governments within pagi and vici, to a more Romanized framework adopting new bureaucratic practices that contributed to the decline of their original cultural identity. The traditional Vestini way of life, typically reliant on pastoralism, agriculture, and trade, evolved as they became part of the broader economic sphere of the Roman Empire. The Vestini were already known for their skill in combat, often serving as mercenaries or auxiliary troops in various military campaigns, enhancing their local economy through this martial prowess. The Vestini's currency, marked with the initials Ves, suggests a level of economic sophistication that evolved under Roman influence. They became notable for their contributions to Rome's military campaigns, with Vestini soldiers fighting alongside Roman legions not only during the Second Punic War, but also in engagements beyond the Italian peninsula, thereby solidifying their role within the Roman military apparatus. Religiously, the Vestini maintained a pantheon of deities that were central to their identity, often associated with agricultural fertility and warfare. The name Vestini itself is thought to derive from the goddess Vesta, or from an Umbrian deity associated with libations, highlighting the importance of sacrificial practices that were tied to their militaristic traditions. Religious observances often impinged directly on military conduct, framing warfare as not merely a political endeavor, but as a sacred duty, enhancing their commitment to fighting for their people and their gods. As the Romanization progressed, the indigenous dialect and religious practices of the Vestini gradually diminished, yielding to Latin language and Roman customs. The Marrucini were a relatively small Italic people, speakers of an Oscan Umbrian language, who historically occupied territories along the Adriatic coast in present-day Abruzzo during the first millennium BC. Their emergence as a distinct ethnic group is traceable to the latter half of the second millennium BC, when Oscan Umbrian tribes migrated into the Italian peninsula. It is believed that they began to settle in the area of the Aterno River, establishing themselves by differentiating linguistically and culturally from neighboring peoples, while simultaneously sharing certain cultural traits that characterize the broader oscillation of Italic tribes in the region. The Marrucini's most notable period of interaction with the Roman Republic began in the 4th century BC. In 325, they were first documented in a historical context during the Second Samnite War, entering a confederation with several neighboring tribes, including the Vestini, the Paeligni, and Marsi, against Roman expansion. Their military alliance initially posed a challenge to Roman ambitions in the region. The Roman commander Decimus Junius Brutus Scaeva engaged them with a strategy that involved devastating the surrounding agricultural landscape to drive the Italic tribes into open battle. This led to a bloody confrontation with heavy losses on both sides. Ultimately, the war did not yield a decisive Roman victory, and the resilience of the Marrucini in the face of Roman aggression was pivotal in shaping their subsequent political strategy. Although temporary, their united front revealed their capability for regional diplomacy and military organization. By 304 BC, following a series of failures experienced by their allies, most notably the Aequi at the hands of Roman forces under consul Publius Sempronius Sophus and Publius Sulpicius Saverio, the Marrucini changed their stance toward Rome. They sent ambassadors to seek a formal alliance, which the Romans granted through a treaty that recognized them as allies rather than subjects. This strategic shift was significant, aligning with Rome granted the Marrucini protection and political leverage in a landscape increasingly dominated by Roman military strength. The Marrucini's decision not to support the Samnite League during subsequent wars further solidified their position, allowing them to retain considerable internal autonomy and leverage their military capabilities alongside Rome without direct subjugation. The social-political relationship flourished, and throughout the 3rd century BC, the Marrucini gradually integrated into the Roman system while preserving localized governance. Their loyalty was made evident during the Pyrrhic Wars between 280 and 275 BC. Unlike other Oscan tribes, they did not engage in hostilities against Rome, but rather sided with Roman forces, showcasing their capacity for military service. Their collaboration reached a peak during the Second Punic War, 218-201 BC, when the Marrucini provided a contingent of 4,000 cavalry fighting alongside other Italic allies such as the Marsi, Frentani, and Vestini. This participation underscored their commitment to Rome and anticipated future benefits from alignment with the dominant power in the Italian peninsula. The Marrucini's military contributions continued into the late Roman Republic. In 168 BC, a cohort of Marrucini troops played a crucial role in the Roman army's victory at the Battle of Pydna against King Perseus of Macedon. This engagement further demonstrated their growing military reputation and increasing integration into Roman military operations. However, as the political landscape evolved, so too did the dynamics of their relationship with Rome. In the early 1st century BC, the Marrucini, feeling the weight of social and political inequalities, joined a coalition of Italic tribes that participated to the social war, demanding Roman citizenship, which had been consistently denied to them. This uprising signified a profound transition from allies to adversaries, albeit temporarily. Under the leadership of Aelius Asinius, the Marrucini sought to assert their rights within the Roman political sphere. Unfortunately for them, they found themselves defeated by Roman legions commanded by Servius Sulpicius in a series of operations that quenched the rebellion. The wider campaign culminated in the siege of Ausculum, leaving the Marrucini marginalized in the new Roman order. Despite their losses during the social war, the aftermath saw Rome reconsider the citizenship issue. The Lex Julia de Civitate gradually extended citizenship to all Italic peoples who remained loyal to Rome, including the Marrucini. This legal transformation drastically altered their identity and status within the wider Roman Empire. Following the war, large swathes of Marrucini territory underwent extensive Roman colonization, particularly under the leadership of Sulla. The newly acquired citizenship and subsequent Romanization process left enduring marks on the Marrucini identity, culture, and language. The incorporation into Roman tribes was symbolized by their classification within the gens Arnensis, effectively integrating them into the Roman socio-political system. The Marrucini's religious beliefs were inextricably linked to their social identity and military traditions. Their pantheon featured gods common across Italic tribes, with paramount worship of Jupiter, recognized as the highest god in their religious customs. In inscriptions such as those on the Bronzo di Rapino, they referred to their chief god as Jovis Patres. The Marrucini revered Jupiter not only as patron of civic life, but also as a martial deity whose favor was invoked in military endeavors, emphasizing a militarily sacred tradition that blended religious devotion with the imperatives of warfare. Additionally, the deity Ceres, associated with agriculture and fertility, held a significant place in their worship, and sanctuaries dedicated to her adorned their territory. An important site of worship was located at Tarinkra, where priestesses conducted rituals, further embedding religious practice within their societal norms. This intertwining of military action and religious observance, typically of many Italic tribes, reflected a vision of divinity that both legitimized their martial effort and provided a societal glue that held their identity together amid growing Roman influences. As Romanization progressed, the original languages, customs, and distinct religious practices of the Marrucini began to fade, overshadowed by Latin and broader Roman cultural systems. The Paeligni were a small Italic people classified within the Oscan Umbrian linguistic group, and they inhabited the Peligna Valley, located in what is now modern Abruzzo. Their historical presence can be traced back to the first millennium BC, with significant developments occurring around the 4th century BC. The precise origins of the Paeligni are not definitively known. Ancient sources provide conflicting accounts, some suggesting an Illyrian origin as posited by Festus, while others, notably Ovid, argue for a Sabine lineage. Both hypotheses may hold merit, as the ethnic characteristics of the Paeligni likely resulted from a fusion of various elements predominantly influenced by the Oscan Umbrian cultural and linguistic traits. Geographically, the Paeligni resided in a strategically relevant region characterized by mountainous terrain shaped by the Maiella, Morrone, and Playa mountains. This geographical positioning, coupled with fertile valleys intersected by the Aeternum, Gitius, and Sagittarius River, enabled agricultural productivity and facilitated trade and military movement. The Paeligni first encountered the Roman Republic in the late 4th century BC. Records indicate that their initial interactions were hostile, with the Paeligni resisting Roman incursions, as noted in Livy's accounts from 335 BC, portraying them as obstructive to Latin expansion. However, the military superiority of Rome became apparent, leading to an inevitable shift where the Paeligni recognized the necessity of alignment with Roman power. By 304, following a defeat of neighboring tribes, they sought formal alliance with the Romans, leading to a treaty that established their status as allies. This alliance allowed them to retain a degree of internal autonomy while automatically integrating them into the Roman military and political systems, demonstrating a pragmatic approach toward survival in the face of Roman expansionism. Throughout the 3rd century BC, the Paeligni played a significant role in several wars involving Rome, particularly during the Samnite ones. Their substantial contributions in these engagements highlighted their military capabilities, often aligning themselves with Roman forces to combat mutual enemies. Despite their initial resistance, their relationship with Rome matured into a cooperative alliance wherein they supported Roman military campaigns while still maintaining some local governance. Even during the Second Punic War, as reports alleged devastation to their territory by Hannibal's troops, it became evident that their military allegiance remained with Rome. They did not participate directly in battles against Roman interests, instead opting to fight against common foes. This strategic alignment continued through up to the late 3rd century, when the gradual process of Romanization began impacting Paeligni culture and language. As the political landscape of Italy transformed, the Paeligni increasingly found themselves compelled to navigate their identity within the expanding Roman framework. By the end of the 2nd century BC, they had begun actively engaging in broader Italic movements, advocating for Roman citizenship, reflecting rising frustrations over unequal treatment from Rome. Their pivotal role in the social war underscored a proactive approach towards challenging Roman authority, as they and their Italic allies convened in Corfinium to assert their desires for citizenship. This coalition represented a critical moment in their history, showcasing the militaristic and sacred tradition that informed their societal structures. Throughout the social war, the Paeligni faced up against Roman forces, and in 90 BC they delivered a bold military response by contributing to the siege of Ausculum, engaging Roman legions in the process. However, despite these efforts, they met with considerable defeat, particularly at the hands of military leaders like Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo. Following their eventual surrender in 88, the Roman Senate offered citizenship to those who remained loyal to Rome, which increasingly included the former rebels. The aftermath of the social war was a decisive turning point for the Paeligni, marking a rapid transition towards complete assimilation into the Roman political system. They, alongside other Italic groups, were progressively absorbed into Roman tribes during the colonization efforts initiated by prominent figures like Sulla. The Lex Julia de Civitate established a framework for citizenship that eventually extended to all former foes, further erasing the distinctive identity of the Paeligni within the broader Roman narrative. Governance among the Paeligni was spearheaded by a figure known as the Mendix, a chief magistrate whose role encapsulated political, military, and judicial powers akin to the Roman praetor. This system of governance reflects the interplay of local traditions with Roman influence, illustrating how sacred traditions, military authority, and civic responsibilities were intertwined in defining Paeligni society. The Mendix's responsibility extended beyond the administration of law. They served as military commanders, embodying the militaristic values inherent in Paeligni culture. Religiously, the Paeligni adhered closely to the typical beliefs prevalent among Italic peoples, worshipping deities who represented various facets of their existence, particularly those connected to agriculture and warfare. Notably, deities included Anacheta, associated with healing and possibly related to agricultural fertility, and the Dioscoroi, who were central figures in their spiritual life, embodying the values of brotherhood and martial prowess. These religious practices underscore the sacredness ascribed to military endeavors, illustrating how spirituality was interwoven with the expectations of loyalty, valor, and community cohesion. The Hernici were an ancient Italic people whose territory lay in the central region of Lazio, primarily between the Liri and Sacco valleys. They shared borders with the Volsci to the south and the Aequi and Marsi to the north. Their relationship with adjacent peoples, including both the Volsci and the Romans, reveals a complicated history marked by shifting alliances and military engagements. Major cities inhabited by the Hernici included Aletrium, Anagnia, Ferentinum, and Verulae, with Anagnia serving as the religious capital and a significant military center. The origin of the Hernici is partly obscured by time, but they are believed to have connections to the Marsi, supported by the accounts of historians like Strabo. Their name has etymological roots in the word erna, an archaic Marsican term meaning stone. Despite the lack of extensive written and epigraphic evidence regarding their language, historians have preserved a few words that suggest their cultural practices, particularly in a religious context. For instance, the term buttuti is thought to refer to litanies sung by women during rituals, while samentum pertains to the sacrificial animal's skin worn by priests during religious ceremonies. Such practices indicate the military sacred traditions rooted in their religious life, where warfare and divine favor intertwine. The Hernici allied with the Romans during the early phases of Rome's expansion. Their involvement in the wars against Veii, especially during the reign of King Tullius Hostilius around 672 BC, marked a significant chapter in their history. The Hernici provided support to Rome in her wars, with Livius Cispius, a notable Hernician commander, representing their military prowess and loyalty as he successfully defended Rome from an attack by the Albanians. This alliance was honored by naming a hill in Rome after him. Such military collaboration not only reinforced their role as regional allies of Rome, but also highlighted their own martial traditions, which involved collective military action in defense of shared interests. In the mid-6th century BC, exacerbations from the ambitions of surrounding tribes, particularly the Volsci and Samnites, led the Hernici to form a coalition known as the League of the Hernici. This alliance was a strategic move to counter threats against their territories and to consolidate their military resources. According to historical sources, this period involved significant political maneuvering, reflecting the complexities of Italic tribal politics, where religious festivals served both as social cohesion tools and as mechanisms to unify their military force. The establishment of religious celebrations such as the Feriae Latinae, initiated by Tarquinius the Proud, showcased how intertribal alliances were maintained through shared religious practices, which played a critical role in legitimizing military endeavors. However, the power dynamics began to shift dramatically after the overthrow of Tarquinius in 508 BC, subsequently when he sought assistance from the Hernici to reclaim his throne with the backing of the Etruscans. The Hernici faced pressure from Rome to uphold their alliances. Their choice to aid Tarquinius led to their military engagement against Rome, culminating in their defeat at the hands of Roman forces led by commanders such as Octavius Mamilius. This battle, known as the Battle of Lake Regillus, further entrenched the Hernici's position as adversaries of Rome and marked a turning point in their fortunes. Following the loss at Lake Regillus, the Hernici sought to regain their standing by aligning with the Volsci against Rome. This move was indicative of the broader regional power struggle, where shifting allegiances often dictated the fate of unstable political entities. Notably, in the years that followed, The Hernicis aggression persisted, leading to multiple invasions and raids within Roman territory. This period of hostilities and territorial encroachments tested the resolve of both the Hernici and the Roman state. Despite their resilience and attempts to negotiate equal status, the tide of power ultimately turned against the Hernici. In 486, they reached a significant moment of diplomatic engagement with the Latins, managing to seal an agreement in conditions of relative equality. However, this autonomy could not withstand the pressures from a burgeoning Roman state, which continued its relentless expansionistic policies. By 362, the Hernici began to withdraw deeper into their territories, sensing the impending doom of their political independence. The decisive blow came around 306 when Anagnia instigated a rebellion against Roman decisions perceived as unfavorable. This insurrection, at the command of Quintus Marcius Tremulus, effectively crushed the Hernician forces. Anagnia fell, marking the formal end of the Hernici as an independent political entity, as the city was reduced to a Roman praefectura. The surrounding cities of Aletrium, Verulae, and Ferentinum were compelled to accept terms that, while affording them some civil liberties, ultimately diminished their status and autonomy. The Frentani, an ancient Italic people who spoke a Noscan language, were closely linked to the Samnites and inhabited the central Adriatic coastal region, particularly between the Sangro and the Four Torre rivers, in what is now southeastern Abruzzo and southern Molise. Their origins trace back to a blend of pre-Indo-European cultures that populated the area, compounded by migrations of Italic groups during the early first millennium BC. By the time of their first recorded interactions with Rome, they had formed a distinct identity amidst this diverse tapestry of influences, emerging as a prominent force in the political landscape of ancient Italy. The relationship between the Frentani and the Roman Republic was complex and evolved through various military and political engagements. Near the close of the 4th century BC, they entered into a contentious rivalry with Rome. This period marked the beginning of a series of confrontations that would characterize their early history. The Frentani, alongside fellow Italic groups, initially resisted the encroachment of Roman power, especially amidst the wider context of the Samnite Wars. History notes their involvement in these wars as they contended with the forces of Rome, which was then aggressively expanding her influence across the Italian peninsula. The three Samnite wars, beginning in the late 4th century BC, were pivotal in shaping the Frentani's destiny. Although they initially resisted Roman forces with some success, the tactical superiority and resolve of the Roman military ultimately forced the Frentani to reconsider their stance. By the time Rome achieved dominance in the region, the Frentani found themselves facing an undeniable reality: the need to adapt to the overwhelming strength of the Roman army. Following a period of fierce resistance, they aligned themselves with Rome in an alliance during the early phases of the Second Samnite War. This alliance, while partially voluntary, indicated a shift in their political calculus, given the effective Roman military campaigns that had already subdued many neighboring Italic groups. Around 304 BC, after significant Roman victories, the Frentani, alongside other Italic tribes, sent ambassadors to Rome to formalize an alliance cemented by a treaty. This alliance marked a crucial transition for the Frentani, as they moved not just from a state of military rivalry to one of cooperation, but also transitioned into a peripheral integration within the Roman sphere of influence. No rebellion on their part could disrupt this alignment, even when the Samnites again took up arms in 315. The Frentani refrained from supporting them, clearly signaling an implicit acceptance of Roman authority in their political affairs. As their military ties to Rome strengthened, the Frentani gradually surrendered much of their autonomy. Their status as allies allowed them significant internal self-governance for a time, differing from the outright subjugation experienced by other peoples. Larinum, one of their key cities, held a particular autonomous status, highlighting the nuanced relations the Frentani maintained with the Roman state. Despite the gradual Romanization brought on by their alliance, traces of indigenous culture persisted for several generations, sustained by their allegiance and local governance. The Frentani played a military role in later wars, including the Punic ones, supporting Rome with contingents of cavalry. Notably, in 225, they contributed a significant force alongside their neighboring tribes, affirming their identity as reliable allies of Rome. Their relationship with the Roman military system was underscored by their role in various campaigns, reinforcing their status within the expanding empire, while also embedding martial values that aligned with Rome's militaristic traditions. The tranquility of the late 3rd century BC marked a brief interlude in Frentanian history. However, tensions surfaced with the outbreak of the social war at the end of the 2nd. The Frentani, among many Italic peoples, sought to secure their rights to Roman citizenship status that had been persistently denied by Rome. Their involvement in this war represented a significant political evolution as they transformed from loyal allies into insurgents seeking redress for perceived injustices. During the social war, the Frentani aligned with a broad coalition of Italic tribes, demonstrating a collective interest in challenging Roman authority. Led by figures such as Marius Egnatius, their forces engaged Roman legions and sought to capture strategic locations. The Frentani forces initially found success against Roman troops, underlying their military capabilities and established traditions of martial valor. However, the tide of battle turned against them in subsequent engagements, culminating in losses that prioritized Roman interests and left the Frentani vulnerable once more. Despite their military setbacks and eventual defeat in 88 BC, the Frentani's legacy was partly preserved in the aftermath. The Lex Julia de Civitate, which granted citizenship to all Italic peoples who remained loyal to Rome, gradually extended this status to the Frentani as well. This marked a significant shift from their previous identities to full Roman citizenship, and is emblematic of the broader process of assimilation that all Italic tribes underwent in the face of Roman dominance. Economic foundations among the Frentani were robust and interwoven with their military identity. Their economy relied heavily on pastoralism and agriculture, leveraging the fertile lands of their territories. Additionally, they engaged in trade linked to Hellenic maritime activities, benefiting from their coastal connections. Anxanum, their principal commercial hub, served as a critical node in trade networks, facilitating exchanges that extended into the larger Mediterranean economic sphere. The archaeological discoveries reveal a rich tradition of pottery and local craftsmanship that persisted and evolved even in the later Byzantine era, indicating the enduring cultural practices amid political transition. The linguistic heritage of the Frentani also reflects their transition under Roman rule. Initially speaking Oscan, they experienced a gradual shift to Latin following their incorporation into the Roman political system. The assimilation of language signifies a more profound transformation of identity, encapsulating the erasure of distinct cultural markers in favor of Roman uniformity. Throughout their history, the Frentani embodied a complex relationship with military traditions that aligned closely with religious practices. The martial ethos prevalent among the Frentani often intersected with their worship of deities, as military victories and the honor of arms were intimately connected to religious observances. This reflects a broader Indo-European tradition that underscored the sacred nature of warfare, where valor in battle was not merely an act of political allegiance, but also a means to gain favor from the divine. The Picentes were an ancient Italic people whose presence in the central Adriatic region spanned approximately from the 9th to the 3rd century BC. Their territory was prominently situated between the rivers Foglia and Aternum, bordered by the Apennines to the west and the Adriatic coast to the east, encompassing the entirety of present-day Marche and parts of northern Abruzzo. According to traditional ethnogenesis narratives, the Picentes originated from a sacred spring in the Sabine region, migrating eastward under the guidance of the totem of the woodpecker, a symbol that later became emblematic of the Marche. This migration linked the ritualistic concept known as vers sacrum, reflecting the interaction of militaristic, and sacred traditions deeply rooted in their identity and practices. As a civilization, the Picentes represent a significant transition period from the Bronze Age to the Iron one, symbolizing the entrance into documented history. This is marked by the introduction of writing, which allowed for the preservation of cultural and political practices. Their archaeological legacy is robust, characterized by sophisticated monumental sculptures, intricate pottery, and metalwork that showcase both artistic creativity and social complexity. The Picentes displayed a penchant for abstraction and fantasy in artistic representations, with their figurative art often imbued with rich symbolic meaning reflected of their religious and military ethos. The language spoken by the Picentes is classified as Southern Pican, an Italic dialect attested by numerous inscriptions. The intricate development of their language underscores their interactions with neighboring cultures, particularly in a region where linguistic diversity was pronounced. In the 4th century BC, a crucial shift occurred when the Senones, a Celtic tribe, invaded and claimed the northern portion of Pican territory, transforming it into the Ager Gallicus. Despite this incursion, the Picentes retained a level of political autonomy, thus illustrating their resilience. In the 3rd century BC, tensions escalated dramatically with the advancing ambitions of Rome. The Picentes had initially aligned with Rome against the threat posed by the Senones during the Battle of Saguntum in 295, a coalition that ultimately resulted in a Roman victory. This event catalyzed a process of Romanization. Following the battle, the Picentes began to adopt Roman customs and integrate their local governance structures within the broader Roman political system. However, as Rome continued its relentless expansion, it frequently challenged the autonomy of the Picentes, leading to rising tensions marked by territorial disputes and political rivalry. The Pican War erupted as a direct response to these tensions, framing a struggle for autonomy under the increasingly dominant Roman influence. Local resentment grew notable among the Picans, particularly by the time they felt encroaching Roman control threatened their identity and independence. An initial alliance with Rome began to unravel as the oppressive nature of Roman expansion became apparent. As a consequence, wars erupted, punctuated by revolts largely spearheaded by Asculum, the Pican heartland. The Roman response was forceful and calculated. Consuls Appius Claudius and Tiberius Sempronius Sophus led military campaigns through the Pican territories, focusing on critical strongholds. The engagement at Interamnia noted a violent clash between the Pican forces and the advancing Roman legions. Earthquakes during battles were interpreted by Roman leaders as divine omens favoring their cause, further fortifying their resolve. Such beliefs illustrate the intertwining of religious significance with military exploit, a characteristic feature of both Pican and Roman culture. As the Picentes scrambled to coordinate their defenses, they assembled a formidable coalition of warriors rallying around ancient martial traditions. However, military engagements culminated in the eventual subjugation of Pisan resistance. After the decisive encounters, particularly where the Roman forces demonstrated superior tactics and cohesion, the Picans were forced to capitulate. Tales of fierce battles, such as those resulting in heavy casualties, reflected the deep investment that the Picentes had in their autonomy and their military sacred traditions. In the aftermath of the war, Roman reprisals were swift and ruthless. Many Picentes were deported, and some received the status of civitas sine suffragio, granting them limited rights within the Roman framework. The city of Asculum stood out during this period, being recognized as a civitas foederata, which preserved a semblance of self-governance, albeit under the overarching control of Rome. To ensure compliance and maintain control over Asculum, colonies of Roman citizens were established nearby, reflecting the systematic approach of Romanization that permeated through Pican society. Consequently, during the Second Punic War, the Picentes, despite their early struggles, actively participated alongside the Romans. Their military history, particularly relationships with deities of warfare became evident as they contributed troops to significant battles such as those at Lake Transumennum and Cannae, demonstrating an enduring commitment to Roman efforts against common enemies. Their military identity remained intertwined with their current societal position, emphasizing how sacred traditions continued to influence their actions even as political landscapes transformed dramatically. The societal fabric of the Picentes was heavily influenced by militaristic values. Those in positions of power were often drawn from warrior classes, reflecting the Indo-European tradition of elite governance through martial leadership. The Picene system displayed characteristics akin to tribal confederations, where local chieftains wielded authority until larger crises necessitated a unified command led by a single chief warrior. This reflects a persistent theme across Indo-European cultures that valorized the warrior ethos and intertwined it with religious beliefs. In religious terms, the Picente system lacked a distinct separation between the sacred and the profane. Their sacred spaces were often linked to natural vistas, emphasizing their connection to fertility and warfare, particularly in the context of deities relevant to agriculture and battle. The significance of female figures, such as the goddess Cupra, signifies an acknowledgement of the divine aspect of life, intertwined with socio-political structures in Picene society. The pattern of honoring ancestors through elaborate burial rituals reflects both reverence for the past and an understanding of continued legacy through such sacred traditions. The economy of the Picentes flourished due to strategic agriculture, extensive trade networks, and skilled artisanal practices. The region's rich soils allowed for significant viticulture, much lauded by contemporary authors like Pliny the Elder, noting the admirable quality of Picene wines highly sought in other territories. Their trade routes established connections spanning the Adriatic and beyond, facilitating the exchange of goods with various neighboring cultures, including the Greeks and Etruscans, further enriching Picene's social and economic frameworks. The Hirpini were one of the primary tribes within the Samnite people, forming part of a confederation known as the Samnite League. This tribe inhabited the eastern and southern reaches of Samnium, bordered by the Apulians to the northeast and the Lucanians to the southeast. To the southwest they faced the Campanians, while their northwestern limits met those of the Caudinian Pentri tribes. The Hirpini lent their name from the Oscan word for wolf, which is rooted in legend. It is said that an ancestral wolf guided them to the lands they later settled. This connection to the wolf symbolism underscores a reverence for martial virtues entwined with their identity. Emerging from a lineage of Italic and Indo-European origins, the Hirpini were linked to the broader Samnite ethnic group. Archaeological evidence indicates that they settled in southern Italy several centuries prior to Roman domination, occupying predominantly mountainous regions. The precise origins of the Hirpini remain obscured by a lack of definitive historical accounts, yet their affiliations with other Italic tribes, particularly the Sabines, suggest an integrated ethnogenesis. The emergence of distinct cultural traits can be observed as early as the 6th century BC, with various archaeological sites displaying characteristics synonymous with Samnite society. The cultural evolution of the Hirpini reached a notable milestone by the 4th century BC as they developed a distinctly Samnite identity, differentiating themselves from their neighboring tribes while still remaining connected to the wider Samnite network. The earliest instances of Hirpini being referenced explicitly occurred during the Pyrrhic Wars, with reports detailing their political and military alignments. Up until this point, they were predominantly viewed as a branch of the Samnites, primarily engaged in regional power dynamics against Rome and its expanding influence in southern Italy. In 268 BC, the founding of the Roman colony of Beneventum, which encroached into the Hirpini's territory, marked a critical juncture in their political landscape, rendering the Hirpini more autonomous from the other Samnite tribes. This separation crystallized over the subsequent decades as Roman influence grew, culminating in the Hirpini's alignment with Hannibal's during the Second Punic War. Their allegiance, however, led to a severe backlash. They were subjugated by Roman forces in 209 BC. This defeat not only imposed political subordination but also initiated a gradual erosion of provincial autonomy. The aftermath of the Social War, 90 BC, significantly undermined Hirpinian ethnicity and identity. Following this period of internal strife among Roman allies, the region faced substantial Romanization. The influx of Roman settlers and administration shifted the socio-political dynamics, leading to the disintegration of distinct ethnic identities, including that of the Hirpini. Their integration into Roman societal frameworks was not merely administrative. Economic, linguistic, and cultural shifts ensued, contributing to the homogenization of the region's population. Significant urban centers formed a critical aspect of the Hirpini's political landscape. Notable cities included Aeculanum, Aquilonia, and Abellinum, which served as hubs of administrative and military significance. These urban settlements exemplified the militarily sacred traditions that characterized their society. Fortified cities were common, signifying the importance of defense and military readiness. The geographic lack of coastal settlements indicated that the Hirpini were more focused on inland territorial control, exploiting the mountainous terrain for strategic advantage against external threats. The onset of Roman provincial restructuring saw the Hirpini's territories being reassigned within the broader Roman administrative landscape. The division of Italy into regions under Augustus, specifically the separation of Hirpinian land from Samnium in the Regio Secunda, Apulia, and Calabria, marked a definitive alteration in their governance and access to resources. This redirection eliminated many local governance systems that had previously been in place, further cementing the loss of Hirpinian autonomy. Despite no definitive records identifying a capital for the Hirpini, scholars posit that Aequum, Tuticum, translating to field of the people, could have served as a political focal point, with some suggesting its role shifted throughout history between being an economic center and a religious site. The absence of extensive archaeological evidence complicates this narrative, but modern findings indicate that settlements like Maleventum gained prominence over time, especially during the Samnite Wars, when strategic locations gained significance in military campaigns. Religiously, the Hirpini practiced the same Indo-European faith as their Samnite counterparts, engaging in the veneration of various deities within a militaristic framework. Sacral spaces, such as the sanctuary dedicated to the goddess Mephite in the Ansanto Valley, resonated with their cultural identity. Mephites represent a martial deity tied closely to themes of warfare and purification. The significance of these sacred sites demonstrates the intertwining of religion with political and military life, reflecting a profound cultural synthesis where spiritual beliefs bolstered martial endeavors. As the Roman Empire extended its influence, the linguistic landscape of the region began to transform. Oscan, the language of the Hirpini, coexisted with Latin during the Roman conquest, leading to a phase of diglossia and significant bilingualism. This dual language environment persisted well into the later imperial period. Notably, Oscan inscriptions were still being utilized even as Latin gained dominance. The Lucani, an Italic population whose language belonged to the Oscan group, emerged in the historical record around the 5th century BC, when they occupied a region that would eventually bear the name Lucani. This territory spanned between the Sele, Bردano, Laus, and Crati rivers, and was previously known to the Greeks as Enotria, inhabited by the Enotria civilization engaged in agriculture and trade. The Lucani's presence marked a significant shift in the demographic and political landscape of southern Italy, as they began to assert control over the region. At the turn of the 4th century BC, the Lucani expanded southwest into present-day Calabria. Their movement brought them into conflict with the Hellenic colonies of Magna Graecia, particularly Syracuse. This expansion was marked by military confrontations, signifying their growing ambition to dominate the coastal regions. Initially, the Lucani allied with Dionysius I of Syracuse, participating in military campaigns against other cities in the area. However, this alliance would later sour, leading to a hostile relationship that further complicated their international position. The Lucani's military prowess was evident in their conquest of Poseidonia, which they renamed Paestum, laying the groundwork for their dominance along the Tyrrhenian coast, with only a few exceptions, such as Velia, resisting their control. However, the Lucani's expansion was not without significant setbacks. In 389 BC, while allied with Syracuse, they faced devastating resistance from Turi, who sought to reclaim their territory. The Lucani extended their influence across Calabria, but internal strife soon emerged, particularly revolving around the servile revolt fueled by dissatisfaction with their leadership at the demands of continuous warfare. Strabo noted that the Lucani armed their pastoral workers during these wars, exacerbating tensions between the lower and elite classes. This revolt led to the emergence of a new ethnic group, the Bruttii, who consolidated power in the territory south of a line drawn between Laos and Thuri. As the Lucani continued their military campaigns, their territorial ambitions increasingly brought them into war with Tarentum, Taras, with the preeminent power along the Ionian Sea. To counteract the Lucani's incursions, the Tarentini sought assistance from their homeland of Sparta. The first prominent Spartan intervention came with Archidamus III's campaign in 338 BC, culminating in his death during battles near Taras. The Macedonian forces under Alexander I, who later allied with the Tarentines, dealt a significant blow to Lucanian ambitions. Alexander's forces bested them at the Battle of Poseidonia, where the Lucani, alongside their allies, suffered a humiliating defeat that severely undermined their military strength. Following these defeats, the political dynamics shifted once more as the Lucani sought further alliances, notably with the Bruttii, as they navigated the complexities of regional power struggles involving competing interests from Syracuse, Taras, and the emerging Roman state. This coalition proved central during the Second Samnite War, when the Lucani oscillated between alliances with the Romans and the Samnites, demonstrating the internal divisions within their society. A faction aligned with Rome capitalized on pro-Roman sentiments, while another faction maintained solidarity with the Samnites and their anti-Roman stance. The Lucani's involvement in major military campaigns, such as the Second and Third Samnite Wars, illustrated their strategic importance in this volatile regional theater. The Romans recognized their contributions during military engagements and alliances resulting from mutual threats. By 302 BC, they allied with Rome against a common foe, Cleonymus of Sparta, demonstrating their capacity for strategic alliance as they emerged from various wars. In the wake of the Samnite Wars, the Lucani found themselves amidst the escalating tensions leading to the Pyrrhic Wars. Their proximity to fertile territories made them attractive allies in the eyes of both the Greeks and the Romans. Initially, the Lucani aligned themselves with the Romans, particularly due to a new spate of aggression from the Tarentines, ultimately participating in attacks against their urban rivals. Their military actions were interspersed with requests for Roman assistance as they sought to extend their influence further. The engagements at Heraclea demonstrated how intricately the Lucani were woven into these larger wars. The clash against Pyrrhus and his troops highlighted their martial traditions, deeply rooted in a culture that valorized warfare and military achievements. The Lucani's reputation took a hit following their defeat by the forces of Pyrrhus, whose tactical mastery cemented his dominance in southern Italy, leading to a temporary but direct Roman response. This not only reinforced Roman power, but also led to a systematic expansion of Roman settlements in formerly Lucanian territories, such as the establishment of Latin colonies in Venusia and Paestum. As the Second Punic War unfolded, the Lucani experienced a shift in allegiance. After the disastrous Roman defeat at the Battle of Cannae, many in Lucania sided with Hannibal, driven by fears of Roman reprisals and a desire to stave off pillaging. Their choice reflected broader regional sentiments among Italic peoples who found temporary safety under Carthaginian rule. Although this alliance led to punitive measures from Rome, the Lucani were allowed to maintain their status as allies or soci of Rome, reaffirming their role in the ongoing power struggles of the Italian peninsula. The social and political tides turned dramatically with the onset of the Social War in 90 BC, during which many Italic tribes, including the Lucani, sought Roman citizenship. This war reflected widespread discontent over Rome's refusal to integrate surrounding populations fully. The Lucani, determined to assert their rights, fought under the leadership of figures such as Marcus Lamponius, achieving notable victories even against prominent Romans. Their final stand at Grumentum marked a significant moment of resistance, but ultimately, as the war progressed and Roman legions retaliated, Lucania suffered devastating losses. Following the resolution of the Social War and the subsequent civil strife, the political landscape of Lucania underwent profound changes. The Lucani emerged as a diminished entity, their once proud martial traditions buried beneath the weight of Roman ambitions, and punitive actions led by Sulla during the late Republican period. Entire cities faced destruction, and the social fabric of Lucanian society unraveled under relentless Roman retribution. By the time of the battle at Porta Collina, the Lucani were no longer a formidable political force, their fate entwined with the overarching narrative of Roman consolidation across Italy. Their traditions and practices, once indicative of a proud and militarized culture, faded into history as their lands were assimilated into the Roman administrative system within the provinces of Lucania and Bruttii. The Bruttii, an ancient Italic people in Calabria, inhabited the region during the Iron Age, concealing a complex societal structure with expansionist ambitions beneath their nomadic shepherds and servants image, as initially perceived by their more dominant neighbors, the Lucani. This misconception stems from the early historical accounts from Strabo and Diodorus Siculus, emphasizing their martial nature, yet their identity and traditions were far more multifaceted, rooted in a rich cultural heritage and a deep sense of community. Their name likely derives from a legendary female warrior, Brettia, who led a revolt against Hellenic forces, signifying significant militaristic traditions within their society. The Brutti's warrior culture was deeply intertwined with their social and economic structures as they coalesced into a confederation known as the Confederatio Bruttiorum around the 5th century BC. This confederation established Consentia, modern Cosenza, as their capital, marking a pivotal shift from nomadic lifestyle to the formation of fortified settlements. The city of Consentia held a crucial place in the collective identity and governance system of the Bruttii. As their capital, it became a symbol of their strength and unity. The warriors of the Bruttii, comprising the ruling class, played a crucial role in territorial expansion and military campaigns, showcasing their martial prowess. These warriors were renowned throughout their region for their bravery, skill, and discipline, which earned them a reputation as formidable opponents. The Brutti's military campaigns were marked by significant victories as they successfully attacked several Hellenic cities during the late 4th and early 3rd centuries BC. Notably, they defeated the forces of the Hellenic king Alexander of Epirus, further asserting their military capabilities and claiming tribute from remaining Hellenic polis. These victories solidified their status as a regional power and fueled their aspirations for further expansion. Their expansionist ambitions drove them to clash with their southern Italian neighbors, the Lucani, in a series of fierce battles that lasted for several centuries. Their wars with the Lucani underscored the internal tensions and power struggles within the Bruttii Confederation. As they expanded their territories, they encountered new challenges and rivalries which threatened to fragment their fragile alliance. To maintain their cohesion and unity, the ruling elite of the Bruttii had to adapt their governance structures and policies to address these internal conflicts. The need for centralized authority became increasingly apparent, leading to the emergence of a stronger, more centralized form of government within the Bruttii Confederation. The Brutti's martial successes, however, eventually turned to defeat at the hands of the Roman Republic around 282 BC, marking the beginning of their decline. The terms imposed by Rome were harsh, stripping the Bruttii of substantial territory and the ability to form alliances or mint their own coins. This marked a significant setback for the Bruttii as they were forced to adapt to a new reality with greatly diminished autonomy. The Bruttii were left with a fragile existence, their power and influence severely curtailed by the expanding Roman Empire. Despite this setback, the Bruttii managed to temporarily reclaim some of their lost territories and reassert their military capabilities when they aligned with Hannibal, the renowned Carthaginian general, during the Second Punic War 218-201 BC. By joining forces with Hannibal, they briefly regained their former status as a regional power, but the consequences of their alliance with the losing side proved disastrous. Following Hannibal's defeat, severe reprisals were imposed on the Bruttii, with many losing their rights, being reduced to servitude or relegated to inferior societal roles. The Bruttii's fortunes briefly improved during the reign of the Roman dictator Sulla, who granted them a degree of autonomy and restored some of their lost rights. However, this brief respite was short-lived, as the Bruttii soon found themselves embroiled in the complexities of Roman politics and the power struggles of the Roman elite. The Roman authorities viewed the Bruttii with suspicion, seeing them as a potential threat to their authority and stability. The Bruttii persisted in their resistance against Roman rule, participating in various rebellions and uprisings throughout the centuries. One notable instance was their involvement in Spartacus' slave uprising, a massive rebellion that shook the Roman Republic during the 1st century BC. This episode underscored the unyielding spirit of the Bruttii, their refusal to submit to Roman authority, and their enduring quest for freedom and dignity. Despite the devastating consequences of their alliance with Hannibal and their ultimate subjugation by the Romans, the Bruttii left an indelible mark on their ancient world. Their legacy is a testament to the resilience and determination of a people who resisted the overwhelming might of their conquerors, preserving their identity and traditions despite the odds against them. The eventual subjugation of the Bruttii marked a significant turning point in the region's history, leading to the consolidation of Roman control and the erasure of their distinct cultural and political existence. The city of Consentia, once the capital of the Bruttii Confederation, fell into decline after the Roman conquest. The site was later occupied by the Romans, who renamed it Cosentia and transformed it into a Roman colony under the Augustan era.